Okay, this is going to be take 3 on how and why the universe was created. Yet another attempt trying to understand the biggest philosophical slash metaphysical question. Now, it's not going to be much different than my previous videos on this subject because I always tend to go towards the same conclusion. So I always start with the premise that before the universe came into existence, there was nothing. There was non-existence. Now, I'm not saying that this was actually the case, but I'd like to believe that nothing precedes something, that everything that exists must have been caused by something else already existing. But if you follow that logic, it will lead us towards the infinite regress problem. Now, the infinite regress problem doesn't really solve much for me, whereas when I think about non-existence, there are some interesting logical conclusions. But if we consider the idea that the universe is infinitely old, that it has existed since forever, then there is a problem there. Because if we can go back infinitely far into the past, then it becomes impossible for the universe to have ever started. It becomes impossible for the universe to have ever been created, because the existence of the universe is defined as an event in time by conventional science. I mean, the notion of creation, when something is created, it has a starting point. So if there never was a starting point, there can be no creation. So if the universe is infinitely old, it never could have been created. If you think about it in an old-fashioned logic way. So either there is a starting point and before that starting point there was non-existence, or the universe is infinitely old without a starting point and therefore the universe never could have been created. Which leads us back to the uncreated nothingness. But anyway, there are basically 3 main options that we see today. Option 1, the universe is infinitely old with no beginning and no end. Option 2, the universe suddenly came out of nothing. Option 3, the universe was created by an intelligent creator. But I want to use the premise that the universe came out of non-existence and see where this will take us when we perform some deductive reasoning. So, first, we must understand non-existence perfectly. Non-existence is the thing in which nothing exists, including logic. Logic does not and cannot exist within non-existence. Because if logic is a thing by itself, and if logic itself makes the conclusion that nothing can exist within non-existence, then logic itself must also not exist within non-existence. So the point is that non-existence is something completely out of reach from logical understanding. Non-existence is not controlled by logic. Non-existence is also not controlled by a mechanism, because a mechanism would also be something that exists by itself. So nothing is in control of non-existence. The laws of physics are not in control of non-existence. So now the question is, what happens when nothing is in control? What happens when the laws of physics are not in control? What happens when the laws of logic are not in control? Think about the famous saying, out of nothing comes nothing. Now that's a logical statement, but since nothingness itself doesn't contain logic, then this statement is neither objectively true or false. It doesn't matter. For non-existence, it doesn't matter whether something is objectively true or false, because there is no logic to determine the objective truth. So, within non-existence, truth doesn't exist. Well, be careful, within non-existence, the non-existence of truth also does not exist. So, within non-existence, the truth neither exists nor doesn't exist. And on top of this, within non-existence, non-existence itself does not exist. Of course, if you want to understand absolute non-existence, then you must understand that 1. All of existence does not exist, but also 2. Non-existence itself does not exist. So not only does non-existence negate existence, but it also negates itself. Because it has to include itself as being non-existent to make it absolute and objective. And that, of course, is paradoxical. Because for our conventional way of thinking, something either exists or doesn't exist. But never does something neither exist nor not exist. Yet, that's exactly what I'm trying to prove right now. That non-existence neither exists nor does not exist. So now we can ask the following question. What happens when there is no existence nor non-existence? Unfortunately, that's the point where all logic becomes totally meaningless. Because when we ask the question, what happens when there is no existence, no non-existence, no logic, no mechanism, no laws? We must understand that the logic behind this question becomes meaningless to the reality it is referring to. The very understanding of an event such as the creation of the universe becomes meaningless. The logical, conceptual understanding behind the word event or the word happening becomes meaningless to what actually happened in reality. In reality, there is no such thing as an event, but there is also no such thing as the non-existence of an event. So to put this into context, the universe was never created, but it also was never in a state of being uncreated. The universe also is not an event, nor is it a non-event. There was never a beginning. There was no beginning to the universe, but there also was no absence of a beginning. So there neither was a beginning nor no beginning. So what we're dealing with right now, what we refer to as reality, existence, the universe, is so perfectly out of reach from everything, including logic and including itself. In fact, the universe itself is out of reach from itself. It doesn't know itself. It doesn't objectively define itself. It doesn't define itself as existence, and it doesn't define itself as non-existence. In reality, it neither is existence nor is it non-existence. We are dealing with something that neither exists nor doesn't exist. And of course, we're also dealing with something that is neither something nor nothing. But also, and maybe most importantly, we are neither dealing nor not dealing with neither something nor nothing. That's the kind of impossible logic you get when trying to understand the biggest philosophical question ever. Is it a hallucination? No, it's neither a hallucination nor a non-hallucination. We are not in control of it with our understanding. It doesn't even control itself. It can only be itself by being completely out of control, by being completely free from everything. So in a nutshell, the natural state of the universe is completely out of reach from conventional understanding / logic. So even this sentence is logically meaningless to the natural state of the universe. And also this one. Okay, but if the natural state of the universe is completely out of reach from understanding, then why is it that we can understand most of the things that happens in the universe? Why is it that the universe seems to follow logical laws which we can understand? I mean, we can understand how stars and planets are made. We can understand how the brain works. We can understand how cells divide themselves and how DNA replicates itself. We can understand how to build an aircraft that stays up in the air. We can understand a lot of stuff. That's why we have become so technically advanced. We have built so many devices to observe this universe, and we have figured out so many mechanisms within the universe. We know how a lot of stuff works. But do we know it perfectly so? What is absolute knowledge? What is perfect knowledge? Will we ever know perfectly what the ultimate building block of the universe is? Will we ever know perfectly what reality is? And here is my answer. We are only able to understand everything within the universe, but we are unable to understand the universe itself as a whole. There is an important distinction between the universe itself as a whole and all the different things within the universe. Nobody will ever be able to perceive the universe as a whole, because you would have to go outside of the universe to perceive the entirety of it. But that's impossible, because if you go outside of the universe, you cease to exist. And not even mathematics can make up a model of the universe as a whole, because if this model contains the universe as a whole, it must also contain itself, because this model by itself also exists inside the universe. It's a part of the universe. So if this model contains everything, it must also contain itself within itself. You see? If a mathematical model can explain the whole of existence, then it must also be able to explain itself. But of course that's impossible. A model cannot put itself inside itself. It can only put something other than itself inside of itself. And so it can only understand the stuff that is different from itself. But it can't understand itself. An absolute theory of everything can understand everything except itself. Likewise, the source of the universe is able to understand everything except itself. God is able to understand everything except itself. The very thing that is responsible for all of existence is unable to understand itself and lies completely out of reach from understanding forever. And that's why terms like existence and non-existence, or real and hallucination, becomes perfectly meaningless to the source of reality. Even the claim that there is such a thing as a source of reality becomes totally meaningless to the actual source, which lies completely out of reach from understanding. And even the claim that any claim becomes totally meaningless also becomes totally meaningless. And so on and so on and so on. It's an infinite regress of paradoxes. Now you might say that this sounds like the typical religious argument that God or the source of the universe is beyond our understanding. But the statement that God is beyond our understanding is precisely an understandable statement. Now, if the source of the universe is beyond our understanding, then the understanding that the source of the universe is beyond our understanding becomes meaningless. It neither is comprehensible nor incomprehensible. It neither is understandable nor ununderstandable. And and here is the final thing I want to say. There actually is one way to have access to the source of reality, and that's through death. When you die, there will be neither existence nor non-existence. Death does not equal non-existence, because again, with an actual non-existence, there is no such thing as existence, and there is also no such thing as non-existence. They both do not exist. Now, it is possible to die without having to stop your heart, your lungs, and your brain from functioning. It is possible to die while your body keeps functioning normally, and that's called ego death. You see, the fact that your heart is beating, that your lungs are breathing, and that your brain is functioning is not the problem. The problem is your need to put a label on everything, the need to define everything, the need to tell yourself what is going on, the need to tell yourself that you exist, that you are conscious, that you are living inside the universe, that you don't know why it all exists. All of that inner babble in your mind must go. You must let go of the need to tell yourself what is going on. Stop saying to yourself that you exist. Stop saying to yourself that you are living on a planet in the universe. Stop saying to yourself that you are experiencing reality. Literally force yourself to stop making any statements about anything. And when you do that long enough, you will slowly start to lose your sense of self, and you will die. And that's the moment when you will enter the natural state of the universe. But on the other hand, pursuing ego death is extremely difficult when done naturally without psychedelics. And that's why body death or biological death is a lot more efficient. Now, I'm not stimulating you to commit suicide. I'm only saying this in favor of antinatalism. Because if your body was never created, you would be perfectly aligned with the natural state of the universe, without the need to take psychedelics, without the need to pursue ego death. Antinatalism is the ultimate solution to keep everything aligned with the natural state of the universe. Because once you are born, you will definitely lose touch with the natural state, and it will be extremely difficult to get back in touch with it. So keep everything as unborn as possible to make sure that everything stays in tune with the truth. Thanks for listening.